Welcome to The Professor is Live with Mark Salisbury, Professor of Computer Science at the University of St. Thomas. In each lively 25-minute episode, Mark and producer Rico Smart dive into topics shaping our world, featuring expert interviews and engaging live audience participation. Discover groundbreaking ideas for the future and timeless wisdom you can't afford to forget, all infused with humor and charm. Leave every episode feeling inspired, informed, and optimistic about what lies ahead. For more bragging about this show, go to The Professor is Live.
Hi, I'm Mark Salisbury. Welcome to The Professor is Live. Today I'm joined by my producer, Rico, that's him down in the corner, and we travel back in time to uncover what history can teach us about the present and even the future. For those watching our video version of the show, my background is London in the 19th century. And that's because we're diving into the story of the Luddites. Most people think that they were just anti-technology rebels smashing machines because they feared progress. But as we'll discover, the truth is much more complicated and way more relevant to our own lives than you might think. But first, let me share a story. And Rico, I think this is why people really tune in, is they really want to catch my story. What do you think?
We all enjoy the stories.
There it is. Okay, here's the story. As a teenager, I was responsible for mowing the family lawn. And we had an old gas-powered lawnmower that was hard to start. I mean, really hard. And one afternoon, out of pure frustration, I flipped the mower over and broke off one of the wheels. My dad was furious, and he wanted me to learn a lesson. And that lesson is control your temper, young man, especially when you're dealing with tools. And so, Rico, did you ever have any experience that was like this?
Something similar, although what I'm really wondering is, did you get out of mowing the lawn?
No, no. But yeah, my dad was not happy with that. But you know what? That lesson didn't fully sink in. My wife often says I have tons of patience with people, but almost none for machines. And here I am now, a professor of computer science. Go figure. So when I first learned about the Luddites and how they destroyed machines, I assumed they must have felt the same way I did when I broke our mower. But the truth is they weren't just angry or irrational. It was much more than that. To explain what was really going on, we reached out to historian Kevin Brady. Joining us now on The Professor is Live is Dr. Kevin Brady, an expert in the history of technology. And Kevin, can you break down who the Luddites really were?
Sure, Mark. The people we actually refer to as Luddites are a group of artisans, textile workers in central England in the early 19th century. And that's a time at which the industry was making a transition from sort of workshop and home-based to factory-based.
Okay, well, very good. So, what were they trying to achieve? So what I understand is they actually were claimed to have destroyed mechanical looms. Were they just frustrated like I was with my lawnmower?
There was an element of that, yeah. In English history, this is called machine breaking, and it has a history that goes back about 100 years before the actual Luddites. And it was a way in which workers expressed discontent. There were no unions, there's not much in the way of labor law. And so one of the few ways in which workers could let the owners know how upset they were is by breaking the machines. And then in the early 19th century, the whole focus of this production is changing to factories. And this is a change not just in the nature of the work, but in the social aspects of how these people lived and worked, the cultural aspects, and of course, their control over the workplace And in many cases, it was a significant drop in their standard of living.
Yeah, and I think that they were kind of stuck with that because what I understand is democracy as we know it here wasn't really in place for them. They really had no voice other than what they were trying to do with destroying these machines. Is that kind of the picture?
That is a good one. That's a good way of putting it. It's a time of transition. England had had a series of laws about labor that went back to the time of Elizabeth. And so a lot of control was very local at the parish level. And in the early 19th century, this began to shift, and the manufacturers, business owners had a lot of influence with Parliament. And so instead of the control of these things being very local and personal, it suddenly becomes very kind of abstract and at a distance. One of the historians who's written about this the most was E.P. Thompson in The Making of the English Working Class. And he traces how this rural population is turned into an urban working class over the course of several centuries. And he talks about their loss of status, the loss of community, and the significant decline in their standard of living. And they had no recourse. They had no vote, no union. So this is their one way of expressing their discontent. And a couple of historians point out that at the time around 1811, 1812, England had more troops patrolling the Midlands, the industrial Midlands, than they had at the Battle of Waterloo.
Wow. That tells you the tip of power, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does.
A lot of times people, I think, have drawn some analogies between what's going on today and what went on there. Now, obviously, as you described, it is very different. But what lessons can we learn today from their clash with this new technology of their time?
Yeah. I think it's really important to consider the wider effects that technology has on people's behavior and their communities. It's not just say let the cell phone replace the landline. We see differences in behavior. People have got these, computers in their pockets, that sort of thing. Jobs are upset. People lose social status. Communities can be undermined by these kinds of changes. So I think we need a somewhat broader perspective on how technology affects the society at large.
Okay, well, very good. Well, thanks for explaining what really motivated them. And so, if I were to summarize, the Luddites wouldn't have broken their dad's mower just because it wouldn't start.
No.
Okay. Well, I can see that that's kind of my problem. So anyway, thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Not at all. It was very enjoyable. Thank you.
And there you have it. Actually, I think that that's pretty eye-opening, wouldn't you say, Rico?
I learned a thing or two.
Yeah.
Of course, we have to remember this is like 1810 to 1812, and this is pre-industrial revolution, and things were changing and changing quickly, and change can make people feel awfully uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah. And so what I think we got from this is from our interview with Kevin is the Luddites weren't mad at technology. They were mad about losing everything to it, though. And their fight wasn't against progress, but really by being left behind by it. And I think you have a saying around it's about the money or something. How does that go?
Is it always the money or follow the money?
It's something like that. Yeah, exactly. And the Luddites lost the fight. We know that. And the march of progress and economics rolled right over them. And to help us understand why, I talked with economist Dr. Keith Gilsdorf. Welcome to the show, Dr. Keith Gilsdorf, professor of economics at Augsburg University. And Keith, how does new technology drive economic growth?
Well, when new technologies come about, that usually implies that we've learned how to do something new, or we know how to do something better than we did before. And what that means is that workers now can do more. They can produce more with the resources that they're already using. And if we can get more out of what we already have, that's economic growth. And one of the nice side benefits of that can also be we're able to produce these goods and services at a lower cost. And that allows us to get things at a lower price. And the one thing I can remember is when I bought a calculator when I started to go to school, it cost me $50 and it could do four things: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And in today's money, that was just under $300. Today, you can go to Walmart and buy a calculator that does a lot more than that for about 20.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, one of the things that's interesting about the Luddite story is, how this idea of innovation really breeds more innovation. And they were kind of caught in this cycle. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, we would argue that in economics anyway, people make decisions normally most of the time on what's in their best interest. So when a new technology is developed, like the computer, it could be used across all organizations in the economy. And people had incentives to seek ways in which they could use this technology to best serve them. And that gave incentives to come up with new ideas and new applications that could be used with that, like spreadsheets, microprocessing, word processing, statistical packages, building programs and things that specifically benefit that organization's mission and goals.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah, I can see how that creates a kind of a cycle. And from your perspective, what does the Luddite movement teach us about economics and progress?
Well, I would say that the tensions that they experienced then are similar to tensions that we experience today. New technologies, they have real positive benefits, but they also can have some negative effects on certain groups. Skills that were once highly valued and important may become obsolete with new technologies. And then what happens to the people with those skills? Their incomes may be hurt drastically. How do they get new skills to do new things? That's a tension today and back then.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's exactly true. We always think this is something new today. Well, turning back to my story earlier, because, really, Keith, this story is always about me. And speaking of progress, I'm guessing the reason my dad was so mad at me for breaking our lawnmower is it's really hard to get ahead when your kid is breaking stuff.
Oh, that's okay. I did many things that weren't also my dad wasn't always thrilled with either, but we survived, right?
Exactly. Very good. Hey, thanks for being on the show today. We really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that was some powerful insights from Keith, and I'm glad we could see him clearly. I was a little blurry. This is what happens, Rico, when you send me out on assignment without any help, is that, we get camera work like that. But anyway, the Luddites, they weren't just up against machines. They were up against the economic engine of the future. And what is it that you always say about this? I see I caught you off guard. Well, you're doing that producing thing. That's what people forget, watching the show. You're actually
Little
working.
technical difficulty.
Yeah. Okay.
Darn machines.
All right. Well, anyway, there's another angle that we really decided to explore. And that is because we are on our own verge of facing similar circumstances. And today, for example, engineers shape the future with the very tools the Luddites feared, ones they thought would take their jobs. For our times, that's AI. So we reached out to Ryan Hart from the University of St. Thomas to help us understand what's going on with software engineering today. Welcome, Dr. Ryan Hart, Associate Professor of Computer Science from the University of St. Thomas. And Ryan, how do software engineers use technology today to solve real problems?
Yeah, hi, Mark. Thanks for having me. So perhaps not surprisingly, large language models or LLMs like ChatGPT have had a pretty significant impact on our ability to find coding solutions to specific problems. Before LLMs, we could use Google and just type the problem that we were having and often get taken to Stack Overflow, which is like a forum for coders, and we could find, somebody else who had a similar problem and sort of adapt the solutions that were provided there to our own situation. And LLMs are really good at doing exactly this, so much so that, the tools that we use to develop software are, integrating these LLMs so that we can get these suggestions and possible solutions as we're writing code, right? Kind of like what Clippy did back in the day. But,
we hated Clippy,
yeah, way more useful. And they're also, LLMs are also really good at generating lots of code, right? We can get full applications up and running pretty quickly without really needing to understand a lot of the details about the code that it provides, right? And students have a term for this. They call it vibe coding, right? Just like prompting the AI in such a way to have it generate code that does exactly what we want it to do.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, what do you see coming next? If we can already write some pretty good code, what's the next turn in the road?
Yeah, I mean, from a software engineering perspective, while I think LLMs can help us get minimum viable products up and running really quickly to, elicit feedback from clients and all of that, I think it's creating a fair amount of technical debt, right? Like the degree to which we understand the code that it's generating and, the degree to which that code is actually finding its way into products that are being released are going to mean that we need to spend time at some point understanding what that code was and how it worked, right? So whether this happens during code reviews, when we're integrating code that LLMs have produced, or, later on if a product is released and then it needs to be changed, and this will happen because software changes for all sorts of reasons, right? Hardware changes, updates to programming languages, external systems, business processes that are supported by software systems, like all those things are going to cause a need for production software to change. And so when it comes time to maintain and update that software, is that going to be the time that we have to, really wrap our heads around the code that LLMs are producing? And are we going to even be able to identify the fact that LLMs produced some of that code? So, while it might save us time up front, we're going to need to spend more time elsewhere, like, wrapping our heads around and validating the code that these tools are providing.
Wow. And this story, starts out with the Luddites and how they were basically facing their challenges with new technology. From your viewpoint, what can modern software engineers learn from the Luddite story?
Yeah, I mean, the tools that we use to write software, the processes that we use to develop and maintain software are always going to change. Now, LLMs have probably had a pretty significant impact in this area, but it doesn't mean that software engineers are replaceable all of a sudden, right? We're going to be able to do some tasks much more quickly, but we're going to pay for that somewhere, like the time that we spend reviewing the code, dealing with changes after the software is released. And so, I think also these advancements are coming whether we like it or not, right? I mean, they can do some pretty cool things, and we need to pay attention to the pros and cons of using tools like LLMs. We'll be able to anticipate some of the consequences. There'll be others, that we can't. And it's our job to make sure that we're getting the most out of these tools and, appreciate the help that they're providing along the way.
So we can't avoid the future, but we can actually embrace it, and could be a good future then from a software engineering perspective.
I think so.
All right, very good. Well, thanks for being with us today, Ryan. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
And there we are. Wow. Well, that kind of sums it up, Rico. You have history, you have economics, you have engineering, all wrapped up in the story of the Luddites. And I think you have a saying, I'm prompting you for that saying again about this.
It's always about the money.
It's always about the money, right? Don't you just love it when you're working and I just come in and interrupt you? So, but that is, but it's actually even more than that, folks. It's about people. It's about fear. It's about being able to adapt. And then that means change. And so technology will always keep advancing. It's unstoppable. And as the old saying goes, 'tis a poor thing to fear that which is inevitable.
Wow, where'd you get that?
Well, I got that from a movie, of course, and that's Tom Selleck's character in Crossfire Trail. And I've been looking for years for some place to use it.
Beautiful. I would be proud.
Yeah, it just sounded so much better when Tom Selleck did it, though. But, you do what you can. All right, that's pretty much wraps up our show, Rico. And for you folks out there, before we go, don't forget to visit theprofessorislive.com for links to past episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time on The Professor is Live.
Watch past episodes of The Professor is Live on www.theprofessorislive.com. Videos are on YouTube's The Professor is Live channel, and podcasts are available on Apple, Spotify, and Google. Hosted by Mark Salisbury. Produced by Rico Smart. Thanks to Dr. Kevin Brady, History of Technology expert. Thanks, too, to Dr. Keith Gilsdorf, Professor of Economics at Augsburg University. And thanks to Dr. Ryan Hart, Associate Professor of Computer Science at the University of St. Thomas. The Professor is Live with Mark Salisbury. Copyright 2025.